Okay, for those of you guys wondering in Zoom why I play the hell's bells, it's because under the Sharia, Christians aren't allowed to ring their bells. So I thought I would play some classic AC/DC. I do this every week. But I gotta talk over it because if I don't, then it gets reported for copyright violation for some reason. Oh well. All right, Kufar, Akbar, everybody, hello. This is another edition of Radio Free Kafiristan, a radio program that is dedicated to rightly dividing the truth between Christianity and Islam. We examine the evidence for both of these faiths on this program in order to arrive at the truth it leads us to this end. Thus go I, peace and blessings, shalom. This is, of course, your humble, ever humble host who is humble about being humble and his humility. Eric, thank you for coming to you live from the cavernous depths of the Kafir Cave in Dar al-Harb, Kafiristan. We are here every Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, that's New York time, 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, that's Chicago time, and everybody else in the world will Google it. You can figure it out from there. I've had people say, I'm in Pakistan. What time would it be there? Well, don't they have Google in Pakistan? I mean, I know they what do they do? What's that called? They censor the internet over there where you can't get anti-Islamic things. Time is not an anti-Islamic thing. You can Google it there, for Pete's sake, people. Okay, I am live casting over here, right in front of me here on my Zoom camera. We'll post this up on the Radio Free Kafiristan Facebook page, and we'll also put it on the crossinthecrescent.com website tonight after the show. I am joined in the Zoom room by a plethora of good friends that are regulars on the Sunday show. We got the Radical Moderate, who is just on here, who is, oh, by the way, we're making this announcement here that Rad picked up a 30-day ban. I just come off I picked up a 3-day ban this past week, but Rad picked up a 30-day ban because when Rad gets banned, I mean, he does it right. So he got smacked down for 30 days. The problem with banning the Radical Moderate is that gives him time to do other things. And myself, Chris, and a couple other folks were in this Skype chat, and he has come up with this great idea that he is going to present at the end of his 30-day ban. Because if you would have just left him alone, he wouldn't have come up with this idea. It was just kind of like what happened with David Wood. He says, if I get banned, you're giving me time to do other things. Okay, well, now he has time to do other things, and things that you don't want him to be doing, because this stuff, you're gonna love it when we get to it. I got my good friend Chris Claus, who's going to be spending the majority of the show with us. We're going to be talking about his debate with Asana on Sunday night. We have John Isaac, our good friend John Isaac is here. Bailey is here, and Isa Kieber made it tonight. Way to go, Isa. No class tonight. Way to go. I like that. Your kind of schedule's working out for you. And then, of course, we got the lady Darcy here. So everybody, thank you for coming. I didn't even look over in the Blog Talk Radio. I guess I should look over there. We don't have anybody in chat over there yet, but that's okay. All right, so remember, I do this every single week. Remember, a kafir is somebody who does not heed the beliefs and prescriptions of the religion of Islam. This is according to the new Encyclopedia of Islam, not to be confused with the old Encyclopedia of Islam, because it may have been something else in the old one, but in the new one, it definitely says that somebody who does not follow the tenets of Islam. This guy does not follow the tenets of Islam. This guy will never bow a knee towards a tent in the middle of the Arabian desert ever one time in his life. I'd rather do a lot of other things that are very unpleasurable than do something like that. Now remember, we are in Dar al-Harb, which is the house of war. This is where the Sharia Islamia is not applied. This is where you can actually have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of conscience, and also have the right to bear arms, which is my favorite amendment. We're going to be teaching that here in 2 weeks. I always love teaching the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It's one of my favorite subjects. If not, well, Civil War is my favorite subject, but that's my second one. Okay, so if you want to call into the show, the call number is area code 319-527-6706, area code 319-527-6706. I've sent out all kinds of messages on Facebook to people. My recommendation wouldn't be to call in the show and just be coming to the Zoom. The audio would be a lot better, a lot crisper for you. And if you ever wanted to interact, it'd be much easier to interact that way. Okay, so Sunday night, after we all got off of our Sunday show and took a break, Chris Claus went to work. Chris Claus went and had himself a debate an hour later with somebody who attends the show quite regularly. I can't ever pronounce his name, so I'm not going to try to do it now, but he goes by the name of Asana. And their debate dealt with the Exodus. Now, when we think of the Exodus, I think of the book of Exodus in the Bible, of course, the second book of Exodus. But then when you read the book of Exodus, there are a lot of things there. And this was the topic of the debate, or at least that is what the impression Chris had. So, Chris, can you come up on mic and give us a little 411 before we start playing these clips on what
Yes, sir.
transpired?
Can you hear me there, Eric?
I can hear you, Lima Charlie, loud and clear.
Excellent. So, well, when we're talking about the Exodus, we have to understand that historical evidence is not apparent at the time of Ramses. So for people that don't know, that have never looked into the subject, the Pharaoh Ramses could not have been the Pharaoh at the time of the Exodus. It is impossible. There are no archaeological evidence to support that Pharaoh Ramses was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. The reason for this is that there's no Semitic graves and things to this in Egypt at that time. Now, so during this debate, it was my job to show that there was actually Semitic people in Egypt so that they were able to come out of Egypt and go into the promised land. So to me, the Exodus evolves around, and I don't necessarily classify the new arrival of the Israelites into the Egyptian area, or into the Egyptian area, as being per se the start of it, but it should be. Because that's where we see the Semitic people starting to fill into the land of Egypt. And I pointed to in the debate, and we're not going to go over any of my opening statements or anything else like that, just basically critiquing Asana this evening. But I pointed out that in Avaris, in the archaeological dig that Manfred Beatick did, he found that roughly 400 years before Ramses, there is actually evidence of the Semitic Israelites in the land of Egypt. And it was, I believe it was Charles Ayling, Egyptologist, that I was quoting in the debate, that there was a statue of it with the tomb in Avaris. And the statue had like a mushroom haircut, had a throw stick over his shoulder, and there were still remnants on the rock that it would have been like a multicolored rock that was on his, for like a coat. So it was they assumed it was either Joseph with the multicolored coat, or it was somebody that had an identical type of life that he would have, especially being a high ruler in the land of Egypt, of course. And that in that where that burial site was there was a palace right beside it. So there would have been no Israelite at that time other than Joseph that we hear of that would have had that high of standing within Egypt. So what I did is I followed a lot of documentaries, and I think the best one I believe is Pat Mahoney, I believe is his name, and he does a documentary, and it's called The Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus. So what they do is they start right from when the Israelites get into Egypt. They show how they grew, they multiplied, they were able to fill the land. I'm Manfred Bietek said that there was roughly 12.5 hectare worth of land where they all started filing in and whatnot. So there was plenty of people for slaves. And then also I showed the graves of the Semitic people within Egypt, and they were dying between the ages of 32 and 34. They had Harris lines on them so that it showed malnutrition. And back then, the only thing that you could assume that type of death could have been from is from the slavery that was going on. So what I did is I built up, I used a cumulative evidence argument to show that yes, the Semitic people were in this area, and yes, they were the people that left Egypt and entered the new land. Now, what Asana was doing is he's just like, I just want to know about the 2.5 million people that climbed that mountain and went across 7 miles and climbed that mountain again and come out. It's just, and to debate somebody like that that doesn't have any knowledge on the subject, to me, it's just ironic. Now, I did ask Asana before this if we could have 15 to even almost a 20-minute opening statement, and he said, no, you should only need 3. But for me to lay out the evidence that the Israelites were actually in Egypt, what happened with them, the leaving of them, and then the conquering of the promised land, it takes more than 3 minutes, and I could barely get it in. I believe it took 13 minutes because I believed I used 3 minutes of my rebuttal for it. So that's the background into this, and it was hard for me to try to debate somebody that had no knowledge into the biblical story of the Exodus whatsoever. Go ahead, Eric.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to play a couple clips of this. And one of the things that I wanted to let everybody in the audience know, because sometimes history not having if you don't deal with it all the time, having a timeline set in your head is not an easy thing to do. So and when I do every, as a matter of fact, what I do every week in my Sunday school class is I provide a biblical timeline of history to everybody in the class, and I go through. This was according to the Bible. This was the creation week according to the Bible. This was when the flood according to the Bible, and I go through the whole thing. So when you look at Abraham, and there's a caboose to this train of thought. When did the Jews come into Egypt? And that date is around 1800 BC. Because if you look at Abraham, who is the great grandfather of Joseph, Joseph was the first one into Egypt. Abraham was called out of the land of the Chaldees into Canaan around 2000 BC. Well, his great grandson, Joseph, you have Isaac, and then you have Jacob, who becomes Israel, and then he has 12 sons. Joseph is sold into slavery. Oh, by the way, to the Ishmaelites. He then, after rising to second power, brings his family into Egypt. And when he brings his family into Egypt, this is where the story goes in the book of Exodus that they begin to multiply, and they multiply abundantly, and then they grow to such a great number that the Egyptians enslave them. And so you have a 400-year period from 1800 to about 1400 BC is where we're putting the Exodus. This is in the Middle Kingdom. And what Chris was alluding to, that the city of Ramses, it just says the city of Ramses. It doesn't mention the Pharaoh Ramses. So it doesn't have to be the biblical, or if you're an Egyptologist, to say, oh no, the Exodus is too late because it's just 1200 BC when it was in reality, when it was mentioned in the Bible as the city of Ramses, and it had nothing to do with Ramses being pharaoh at the time. Just to set that straight. Okay, so Chris.
And I think even in the story of Joseph in Genesis, it alludes to the land of Ramses, even at that time. So definitely Ramses wasn't the pharaoh there. It's just the way they alluded to it, him being such a great builder and whatnot of the ancient kingdom, right? So
yeah, so you'd only be 400 years off then. Okay, so let's go ahead and play this. You wanted me to start at the
top? Yeah, but before we do start there, is the thing is a lot of people date the Exodus because of Ramses. But I'm sure that you watched as well in the documentary and have read it as well, that in the Bible, it states that David built his temple 480 years after the Exodus.
Exactly.
Well, Solomon built the temple in 980, right?
Well,
or around 9. It was around 97 or something like 930 or so. I don't.
It's 968. 968. 968 is the date. Yeah. That's a hard date that he started building the temple.
So then you go 480 years after that, and it's even closer to when you should have it. So it's about 250 years off of or before the time of Ramses. So we're roughly about 200 years off, maybe 100 years, give or take. But the argument, I believe, and everybody should watch this documentary, the argument that they give for the Dark Ages and how they date the Dark Ages is completely plausible that it could be lacking in certain areas. I just want to state that. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So let's start this now. What am I going to be playing here? Number one, I didn't get to the debate until I think you guys have been going for about 30 minutes. So I'm really running this blind here. This is a 2-minute spot. Is there anything that you want me to highlight here before, or you want to mention anything here before I hit it?
No, this is basically, we're going to go with this is the start of it's Asana's opening statement.
Okay.
Then there's a couple of his rebuttal. And then the end of it's just the question and answer between me and Asana that I wanted to address as well. So this is basically his opening statement. I just wanted to point out how ridiculous he is.
Okay, here we go.
Which I don't really like that word, but he is my opponent in the conversation. And as you can see, he actually spent 10 minutes not giving evidence of an exodus. What he did do, he told some things about maybe they're slaves different places, which no one denied. Also, he made many comments about just different things that had nothing to do with the Exodus. When we talk about the Exodus, the reason why I said you have to have faith to believe in the Exodus is the mere fact that what we're talking about is the transportation of over 1 to 2 million people who crossed the Red Sea in a single day. Now, keep in mind the Red Sea is about, let's say, 2,000 feet deep, which means that basically they'll be like going down a mountain of that level, then crossing over around 7 miles wide, and then climbing up a mountain with 2 million people, elderly, cattle, all wagons, goods, all that sort of thing. Then crossing the desert to, let's just say, to Mount Sinai. That's a lot of ground. That's a lot of people. Like I said, over 2 million people with all their wares and people. What I'm saying is there is no evidence, literally, and no Egyptian history. Out of all Egyptian history, there's no such history of such a people and such an en masse group of people going that distance with that amount of people. And also in Egyptian history, there's no a pharaoh chasing this group and drowning or anything.
Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, so here Asana's making the statement that he knows nothing about this subject whatsoever. If he would have actually studied up on this subject, there is actual evidence. Now, I wouldn't say of 2 million people crossing the Red Sea, but I don't believe that it could I believe it's possibly the Reed Sea instead of the Red Sea. There's an argumentation there to be made in the translation of the Hebrew, and they were in the same spot. And it, so I was waiting for him to bring that up because I thought that he actually had studied it and wanted to actually debate this subject. So that's why I allowed for a 30-minute open discussion. I was hoping that it could have been just, I ask him a question, and then we start getting into a roundabout style answering and just having a conversation between the two of us, because I think that that's the best way to do debates, especially when people know what they're talking about. But clearly, Asana has no idea what he's talking about because he said I gave no evidence. The problem with that is he has no idea about the subject in the first place to know what evidence should be given to be able to provide evidence for something. So just as I would say for the resurrection of Jesus, um, I'm going to do a cumulative argument for that as well, and I would go about proving certain things beforehand and afterhand to say the most probable explanation of this whole situation was the resurrection of our Lord and Savior, which is exactly what I did for the Exodus, because I believe that the Exodus was a supernatural occurrence. There's no way that the sea would have parted if it wasn't a supernatural occurrence, and things to this nature. Of course, the 10 plagues and things to this nature. He said, I'd never give any type of evidence. I even quoted the admonitions of an Egyptian sage, the letters of Ippawur. I even quoted from Manuth, I believe his name is, one of the old um, ancient pharaohs. He said that in the day of Dudamos, God had smote the Egyptians. And God in that statement is singular instead of plural, which is pretty much unspoken, especially in Egypt. It's all pluralities of God. There is no singular God in the Egyptian history. So it points to a certain time in history when a singular God had smote them. Now, even to go further than that, you can go to the hieroglyphs as well in Egypt. And I guess I wish I could have remembered it for tonight. But on one of the hieroglyphs, you have like 3 waves, as in waves for the ocean. And then beside it, you have 2 daggers. And what that represented was a parting of the sea. So it's actually inscribed on ancient Egyptian documents that these things happened. But again, it's not during the time of Ramses. It's a lot earlier, which is why almost all scholars in the field deny it being the Exodus, simply because it's just not at the right time frame.
Yeah, and there's a couple things that he did that he mentions here. He says, well, how can you move 2 million people? And this is true, and this pretty much obliterates Nadir Ahmed's shtick of saying that Muhammad is like Moses of Deuteronomy 18:18, where you have just a little over 100 people making a hijra up to Medina, versus you have millions of people leaving Egypt. But then he says they can't go up a mountain. Now, I would like to know how he knows what the route was. What route did these people take? How does he know what this is? If they can't go up certain inclines, declines, you're gonna have to show us the route that they took in order to demonstrate that they could not do something. And with you, Chris, I'm gonna have a little disagreement here with you on the Reed Sea thing. I believe they crossed over at the Gulf of Aqaba. There's evidence, well, I don't say evidence, but there are ancient pilings over there on each side of the Gulf where they could have left the Sinai Peninsula and into what is the land of Midian right there. They have some archaeological evidence of chariot wheels. I'm not sure how well confirmed they are. I do know that they've had divers go down there, and they've seen that they have the same type of chariot wheels that would have been used at that dynasty. I think it's the 18th dynasty. That would have been consistent with the Exodus. So when he says that there's no evidence, this is the same thing as a thief trying to look for a police officer after he's committed a crime. Well, I can't find a police officer anyway. It's the same thing. And I dealt with this when I engage in the creation evolution debates with people. I mean, they can't find any evidence for design in nature. None whatsoever. It's not there. It's because they don't want to find it. If you don't want to find it, you're not gonna find it. And one of the things that, in order to establish that this event even could have happened, what you have to do is you have to place the Jews in Egypt at this time. And that's why I kind of laid the framework for having a timeline here of understanding that this is completely plausible with the timeline with the time period that we're speaking of tonight. You have to have them in the same location. You have to have them within the same time. You have to have this people group. And there's evidence of a people group because they have ledgers. They have ancient ledgers of the slaves, of who was a slave, and they have Semitic names. They have Jewish names.
Yeah, like I said during the debate, that comes from the Brooklyn Papyrus.
Yeah.
And one of the names right in the papyrus is Sapphira, one of the handmaidens in the actual Exodus story in the Bible.
Yeah, and so there is evidence for it. It's whether or not you want to admit to the evidence. Now, I see Isa in the Zoom room had his hand up. I didn't know if you want to bring him on now or if you want to wait until after we get done talking.
Yeah.
This.
If he wants to come on in and say something, ask a question, go ahead.
Okay, so let me unmute you, sir. Hello, Mr. Isa. You're live from New York. How are you tonight?
Cool. So you're in New York. I'm in Philadelphia.
You haven't.
Cool.
You haven't bathed this week. Would you say?
Huh?
What did you say? You haven't bathed this week?
No. I said I'm in Philadelphia.
Oh, you're in. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Philadelphia. I'm on the East Coast too.
But you have bathed this week, though.
Yeah, like every single day. Like I think that's what most normal people do. But
okay. What's going on? What point do you got here?
Well, I think this is an interesting narrative. I'm not sure. I don't see the importance of trying to make these spiritual texts, these religious texts, historical. I don't see why we need to prove the 10 plagues existed or not. I don't think there's any independent source that proves that. I mean, I don't see why it matters where, like, if there was 40 years in the desert and the splitting of the Red Sea. I don't see what the goal of making that literally true. Like, I don't think that hurts the theology if it weren't historically true. That's my question. Why does it need to be historical?
And your question is very valid because for thousands and thousands of years, Jewish people have been celebrating the exodus of their people, and they have not. They don't believe it. They don't believe that it actually happened, but they're in faith. They just it's basically a moral story for them, but they still accept it and they still move on. But what I'm saying is, if we do have evidence out there, and it does support our religious text, that gives a little bit more confirmation, evidential wise, to your faith. Because I believe that myself, I definitely have faith, but evidential faith with evidence, to me, is a more stronger faith for someone to have. They're less likely to lose their faith in that situation, I believe.
My question would be then, if we're implementing scientific theory, and, archaeological methodology. How do we approach this without using like circular reasoning? So basically, I believe something, I find evidence, and that evidence is going to lead to what I already believe. How do I escape that cycle? Because I mean, that might find evidence, but I can say, well, this evidence actually just supports me because I already believed it from the get-go. So how do you escape that bias?
Well, it is indeed a confirmation bias. Nobody,
Yeah.
no Christian is going to deny that we do have confirmation biases. But
I don't think anybody would deny that they have a bias. And when anybody reads anything, that you have a bias in whatever you read. And I think that that's the great thing about debate and conversation and dialogue, is that two people, when looking at the same information, if have a little different bias about that information, can sit down and talk about certain things. I think that the people listening to that conversation is getting the best conversation and the best evidence possible. So this is why I believe, and again, I don't think that our whole faith has to have evidence. That's definitely not what I'm saying. I just believe that faith that has evidence behind it is a stronger faith, and you're less likely to lose it as quickly.
And that's a key point right there, Chris, because when you talk about studies, surveys of why Christians are leaving their faith and becoming agnostic, or in a lot of cases atheistic, is because of treating the Bible as just a set of stories, just a set of moral stories that we should live our lives by, but it's not rooted in any type of historical validity or historical reality. But when we start looking at history and we do start finding the type of evidence that the secular sources would accept, not the supernatural evidences that or the faiths that we have as Christians, Jews, Muslims, or whatever. I mean, and think about this: Muslims have faith that Mecca was a city at the time of Muhammad in the 7th century, but we don't have any evidence whatsoever that Mecca existed at the time of Muhammad, but yet they still believe it. Why? Because of faith. Well, even if we didn't have any, evidence, physical evidence, for the Exodus, I would still believe it. And the reason why is because I believe that the Bible is indeed the inspired word of God, and so I would believe it just based on that. But the fact is that we do have evidences, whether it's archaeological, manuscript evidence, we have Egyptian hieroglyphics, we have all of these things that point towards an Exodus, an event happening at that time. And then if you fast forward that, you have traditions that the Jews participate in that would be built on just stories. We just have this story of the most celebrated event in Jewish history is the Passover. Well, we just have this story that we celebrate every year. It just happens to be the most important event in our history, but it was just a fairy tale. But the thing is it's not. So I believe, and I might be running contrary with what Chris is saying here, is I believe that this has to be historical, not ahistorical. It cannot be allegorical. It has to be an historical event in order for me personally, to maintain my faith.
That's an interesting thing. Like for me, I don't know. I see all of these things more as a metaphor and allegory. It's hard for me to look at the history and say, I see a complete translation. Just a lot of these things, like water being turned into blood, real hail coming, frogs and locusts and the firstborn. And to me, if we're trying to look at it through let's say a Jewish lens, a Hebrew lens, the atheist Jew, as you were talking about, the agnostic Jew, or the secular Jew, I don't think it's an empty allegory for them. It's a kind of, this is a tradition, this is a cultural thing. It's a spiritual narrative. It's like reading, I can imagine if we go 2,000 years in the future and someone reads Harry Potter and they're going to be like, this is a spiritual narrative, whether it was constructed or not. When I read a superhero story, it doesn't matter if, for me personally, I guess this is where I theologically come in. I don't see how important that is, because I think a lot of our history is based on certain kind of evidentiary types of things. So if I look at the New Testament, for example, it says in the Gospel of Matthew that the Sadiqim, the holy ones, rose from the graves. There's no evidence of people rising from graves, like people who die coming back to life. Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, there were certain cases of people who medically weren't actually dead, but the people, because of their limited science, had that. There were certain cases of that occurring. I understand that, but I don't see.
Whoa, are you denying, like, you're basically denying the possibility of the supernatural then, because you're saying like people rising from the dead, departing, or like the supernatural things that happened back in Egypt and things like this. So do you affirm, or are you trying to say that you just doubt these type of supernatural things happen, therefore that they have to be metaphorical and allegorical?
I don't say they have to be, but I think they're better as literary devices. I see it more as a literary text and a spiritual text. I don't need this stuff to be real. Like, I could get the benefit from reading the spiritual text of like reading the New Testament or the Tanakh or the Quran or Bhagavad Gita or whatever, you Tripadika, whatever text, spiritual text I'm examining, and I'm looking for the wisdom of the text. I don't see them as history books. I don't see them as science books. I've heard people try to argue flat Earth using the text, and
wait, why do you believe it then? I mean, seriously, you either believe this thing or you don't believe this thing. You either believe in the supernatural. I mean, seriously, if you believe in God, you believe in the supernatural. Okay, you believe in a being that created everything, whereas you have materialistic scientists, okay, say, no, it was aliens who created everything. Well, who created aliens? Well, we don't know that. Then they go into alternate universe and stuff. In other words, I'm saying they make up all kinds of nonsense to disavow the supernatural. So again, the question, I'm sorry to you, brother, is why? I mean, yes, all these things are allegorically, all these things are beautiful spiritually, all these things have different nuances and different messages to it, and different, enlightening things. I do not deny that, okay? But the thing is, if these things did not happen, okay, if the supernatural does not exist, then why do you believe it? Why not believe in alternate universes and space aliens that created everything, or that it's turtles all the way down, as it says? The creation of the universe is just turtles all the way down. And that's just my question to you, and I'm kind of done here. I hope that came through.
Yeah, I hear you.
Hey, Issa, by the way, that's the radical moderate. He's out on his motorcycle tonight.
Sure. I see his name.
And
he reminds me of a YouTuber that I forget what his name was, but he's on a motorcycle and he videotapes himself, and you like see his hands and stuff. It's like God's wrath or something. It's some YouTuber like that.
He's a regular member on the show. As a matter of fact, he's a panelist.
I've seen him.
Okay, but yeah, right. So your answer. Go ahead.
To engage that question, I think this word supernatural is a way of us to explain things that we don't understand. Perhaps there might be a lot of, like, when I read like ancient Roman philosophy, they use certain kinds of imagery to explain, I would say Greco-Roman, going to like Aristotle and Plato, and you see certain imagery being used. Is this literally true? Like, I imagine like someone from the 1600s coming now, and they see a car, they're going to say it's a carriage, with fire, because that's the language that they understand. So I think we're limited by language. We're limited humans. So I think for me, I think it's beyond our pay grade to even try to explain what this stuff is. I think we can have our own personal understandings of what they are, but I don't think it discounts it. I'm not saying supernaturals. I think we are limited humans, so there's so much more beyond us. So I have to defer to that. But that doesn't mean because I don't know this information, I'm going to claim that I know what it is. So if I read this text I'm not going to claim. I'm going to try to take a degree of humility and say I don't know what this is. I don't think that the story. I'm not discounting that the narrative is true. I'm just not assuming that it is true. I leave the door open. I'm going to say it's possible. I don't know. I don't have.
There's a.
Is it just a sec, Eric? Is it possible for you to get the same feeling when you're reading the book of Harry Potter? And if not, why not?
I'll be honest, like when I was younger, I read the entire Harry Potter. I read the full book in just like a couple of days. Or yeah, it was the Goblet of Fire. And I did feel kind of a spiritual elation because I felt resonant with the characters. I was connected to the characters that I was reading about.
Excellent. So pause right there. So basically what you're saying is we could read any type of material. It could be fairy tale, it could be supposedly sacred scripture, and we could get this feeling and we could take that as being a part of the supernatural, which I totally reject every way, shape, and form. Simply because you get a feeling doesn't mean it's the right feeling. And we have to know where this thing is coming from, and we can't just assume that every writing can do this, especially fairy tales that have never existed.
Well, the question that I would ask about that is, how does one know what is the true way of thinking about this? Like, I don't know. Like,
well, that is the question. I mean, how do we know that our faith is true? Well, we test these things, and this is what Christians do. This is what we've been doing for centuries. This is why we had an enlightenment, and the Bible has been subjected to all the higher criticisms that it has, and it has survived these things. It's survived it not only through the manuscript evidence, it's through the historical timelines, but also the archaeological evidence that has confirmed many of the stories, characters, and places in the Bible itself. And it's interesting, Chris brought up Harry Potter as far as an analogy, because this past week, J.K. Rowling has gotten herself kind of into a little pinch with some Muslims, because in one of her books, she mentions somebody wearing a burqa. And if they wear a burqa, they could just about go into any place and do anything they want without having their identity. Who is that? Okay. Now, one other thing that I wanted to bring up to you, Isa, was these right here. Let me see here if I can get them up here. This is a 2-volume set. It's written by a guy by the name of Craig Keener. And golly, come on, you rookie. Let's go this way. There we go. Can you see these?
Yep.
Okay, this guy, he documents and catalogs thousands. When I say thousands, I mean thousands of different supernatural events. And when I mean by a supernatural event, somebody goes in and they have an MRI done and they have cancer. Nothing's done about it, and a week later, after they've been preyed upon, they go back in, have another MRI done, no cancer. People go in there and they have something, all kinds of different ailments, physical ailments, and they're gone. And there's no medical or scientific explanation, an explanation that you appear to be embracing here, which is just be pure naturalism. You can only have a purely naturalistic explanation for events when there is none. I mean, if that is your standard, saying, okay, I only believe the things that can be demonstrable through using scientific methodology. Well, you can't demonstrate the existence of the universe. You cannot, the universe just cannot come into existence following the same type of natural laws that we see today. I mean, you're violating the first law of thermodynamics, the second law of thermodynamics, the philosophical law of causality. I mean, there's all kinds of things going into that. And then you can't demonstrate how life comes from non-life. There's just no way that this happens. You can't demonstrate how you go from a simple, and I would say a simple single-celled organism to exponential growth in this, the functionality of a simple celled organism, in the DNA strands, where you have to have these exponential increases in order to have this functionality where we see what we see in all extant species today. That just doesn't exist. What we see is quite the opposite. We see the degradation of the functionality in the DNA chains in nature. So when we start to say, okay, we want to prove things naturalistically, we can't. And when we start making this application to our faith and saying, okay, well, you can only, say that this cannot happen because it doesn't happen in nature. What you're doing is, and like Robert says, is you're removing the supernatural, the supernatural piece of that pie. If you're going to have faith, you have to believe in something, whether it's a God, a being, an entity, whatever. If you're a deist, you have to believe something based on the evidence that we have, that something higher exists. And then if something higher exists, what is that higher being? And this is where, Paul tells us in the first chapter of Romans that we can know intuitively that there is a God by what we see. Now, the special revelation is what we can get in the Bible. And when we look at the Bible, everything in the Bible is, I'm not saying everything is demonstrable, but everything that we do find does support what we find in the Bible. Where am I wrong on this? Am I thinking wrong about this?
No, yeah, and I'd say the same thing. And even atheists believe in the supernatural. They just don't want to admit it, because there's not one atheist that it lives today that would deny the existence of dark matter and dark energy. It's not natural.
Yeah, and the thing of the thing,
right now,
an atheist is basically saying he knows everything, because if he knows that there's not a God, and to be honest, you have to be agnostic. But if you know that there's not a God, that means that you've checked every nook and cranny of the entire universe and you haven't found God. That would in turn make you God. Therefore, you would not be an atheist because you are God. It's a stupid argument.
I think the argument for the atheist, to be fair to the position of the atheist, is that the atheist is going to argue that they're agnostic. They just don't believe in God. It's not that they know God doesn't exist, because no one knows that. That's 100% for real. And my point is, I'm not saying the supernatural doesn't exist. I'm saying we don't know what that is. And my problem with the conversation is, how can we claim what it is? This is my issue. I'm like, because if I take a Hebraic vision of the Tanakh, it's a very different vision than what is the modern standard Christian version. It's not the same thing. They're the same book. That's not the same reading. It becomes a different book. If a Jew reads the book, it's different than how a Christian reads the book. It's not the same thing. There's no Satan in Hebrew tradition. That's a later addition understanding. And then we have the John Milton's Paradise Lost edition of what Satan is. And then we see that further embellished within Islamic tradition.
Hold on, back
back
up to this. The Jewish tradition does not believe in Satan. Does not.
No. The name Satan. He's right. And the name Satan doesn't exist then, but the liar and the description definitely did.
Okay. Well, because I'm saying, like, the third chapter of Genesis, he's introduced.
Well, that's the serpent. That's the serpent. That's a complete different character. So to a Jew, there is no Lucifer. There's no Hallel ben Shechar. This character does not exist at all. There's no
evil.
fallen angel.
But there is evil.
Yeah, well, but the thing is, there's the Yetzer Hora and the Yetzer Tov. So these are two Jewish concepts. You have good inclination, you have evil inclination. That's what it is. And all power of good and evil is God. There's no like adversary that is there, according to Jewish tradition. So Christianity and Islam are similar in this component, that there is a satanic figure that is opposing us. And the book of Revelation is really where it hits hard. This is where we see this character is very, very strong, with the 7-headed dragon and the harlot, and there's the trumpets. It's a very powerful, it's a very beautifully written text. It's very powerful, but that's where we see this. But Jews don't believe that. So, there's a character, the story of Job, right? That character, Satan, is not the Satan. It's just an agent of God for Jewish people. So
yes,
this is interesting thing to think about.
An evil agent of God, yes. that we would identify as Satan, which would be a fallen angel. So it's the same concept. It's just they didn't, I would say, put a name to it. The concept's been around forever, and I'm not sure where you're going on this, because I could argue this to the moon and back, but this isn't really the conversation today.
That's what I was
So hopefully in the next couple of weeks we might jump back into this. But yeah, so the concept of evil, the evil one, definitely was a concept in ancient Judaism. I would argue back on that fact.
I could counter that. I've studied this very extensively.
No, I definitely agree you could, but for today's show, we are dealing with the Exodus. So if we could set up a conversation about the evil one or Satan from back in ancient Egypt or ancient Hebrew to see what they believed in a different week. No problem. I just don't think that we should fill today's show with this. That's
fine, but the point is our conversation led to that. It's not just me. We all together as a team came to this point. So that's it. I'm just saying that's aside. We were talking about Exodus and we tangentially got brought to this point. So yeah. Yep. The point of what we were saying about Exodus is that this literally happened. I actually was thinking about talking about this because we have movies like the Ten Commandments, Gods, and what is it? Gods and something with Christian Bale. They made a lot of these movies about the thing, but I thought what's fascinating is how they depict these people, how they make them look. I think that's very interesting in and of itself, how people think these people look like. What is our implicit bias of this story? I think that's an interesting thing to think about as well. You say this literally happened? What did these people look like? What did they do? What was their culture like? And the way that we've depicted them in our collective mind here in America. I think you're in Canada. Am I right, Chris?
Sure, I am.
I heard the abort. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. No, yeah, and I definitely agree with you, but and that's what I tried to do in the debate, and that's why I think that when we debate things like the Exodus and things to this nature, that it needs to be a lot more of discussion. You can't just try to get your point done in 5 to 10 minutes, because what I tried to do is I tried to show when the Semitic people arrived, what they did, how they grew, the different evidence of the weapons that they had, the pottery, that they were being buried with their donkeys, certain traditions that the Semitic people had that the ancient Egyptians traditions didn't have. So I was going through all of that and showing their move, their travel, the remains, archaeological finds within the Egyptian area. And the only thing that Asana wanted to know is just how 2.5 million people went 2,000 feet down one side, 7 miles across, 2,000 miles up, and then across. So
where is he talking about, Chris?
Well, when he's trying to talk about the Red Sea, right? He's trying to say that if a sea empties, then there would be a mountain on one side, mountain on the other, and there would be like a 7-mile track in the middle. He just doesn't understand where the actual track that Moses would have took the people during the Exodus would have been. Like, he must think that they crossed the middle of the Red Sea or something. I have no idea what he was thinking.
Well, I'm going to find it while I play this clip, but there's a spot in the Gulf of Aqaba where the Red Sea, because you have the Suez Canal, or the Suez, and then the Gulf of Suez on the west side of the Sinai Peninsula, and the Gulf of Aqaba on the east side. Now, if you go over to the Gulf of Aqaba, the place where this is where they're thinking that this is where they found those chariot wheels. The floor of the Gulf goes kind of like this, and then it goes up, and then it comes back down. And this is where they think, when it's up here, is where they cross. So having to go, what do you say? How many feet? 2,000 feet down and 2,000 feet up.
Yeah.
And then I said, well, and he says, in the mud. And I said, well, if you read the Bible, it says they did it. This is on dry land. This was a miracle of God. So I don't see a problem with it, even if it is going down that far and going up that steep of a hill.
I have a question to think about this. So I was arguing the point about, does this literally have to exist? But then I would also add because I take a nuanced position, why can it not exist? I don't see it. I think it could be either way. I'm not sure why that needs to be debated. My only position before in the conversation was, do we have to focus on that? Is that the most important thing? And we've already gone through that. But so I don't see like why. I think that's a kind of a funny thing too. Do I need to scientifically go and try to show that this did not happen? You know, I mean, tracks will be covered.
Go ahead.
The only thing I was saying is that the tracks could be covered. It's possible that the evidence could all be gone, right? And it still could have happened. I don't
for sure.
Yeah, 3,400 years
and
ago.
that's
not much evidence.
And that's the reason.
400 years. Yeah.
And that's why I use a cumulative type of evidence to make my argument, because it's hard for you to be able to prove that something supernatural happened. So what I did within the debate was I gave all of the surrounding type arguments to say that this is the most plausible explanation of what happened to the Israelites. And I believe that, like, because you keep saying, I don't know why we have to believe this, and I'm telling you why. To make our faith stronger. It is no problem to have faith in something, but your faith greatly increases when you have evidence for what you had faith in.
And I think it's necessary. And I think it's necessary to have your faith to be predicated on something that can be demonstrated, like the life of Christ. You can't believe in Christ if Christ did not exist. You cannot demonstrate that he existed. Well, we can clearly demonstrate that Christ did in fact exist. We can clearly demonstrate, oh, by the way, that Christ did in fact die on a cross in Jerusalem in the first century. These things are what we would call indisputable historical facts. You have too many different congruents or different points of evidence converging on the fact that Christ lives. There has to be a historical figure there. The same thing with the Jewish people. There has to be a historical group of people in order for the Bible to be true. If there was no historical group of people in Israel, then that entire book of the Bible is nothing but some fanciful story, some myth. And my faith is not predicated on myth. My faith is predicated on real historical events. And
I wouldn't disagree. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. That's fine to disagree. I'm not going to sit here and, mute you and kick you off my show and call you a Christophobe or anything like that. I'm not going to do that. You could, but it's fine. And I like to hear why you disagree too. Go ahead.
Oh, I said I wouldn't disagree.
You wouldn't disagree. Oh, okay.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. I can understand why the situation could be that there is a spiritual story. I just don't know. The point is, do I believe that there are elements that existed? Sure, I'm not against that. But did everything from the text transpire in real life? That is something I don't know. Like, if we look, you
have to go by faith.
Fine, and that's okay. I think faith is a beautiful thing. I work as a chaplain. I think that's a great thing. It helps. It supports and it helps people, and that's my other job too. I'm a teacher and I'm a chaplain. I do both jobs. But this is something that I think really helps and supports people. I think we need it. I think it's a great thing. The problem I have, I guess, in the entire conversation is certainty. I think faith is fine if you feel it in your heart and you're sure in your heart, but like I see preachers on the street who go and say, I know this is true. This is 100% right. I don't know. To me, I don't feel comfortable with that position myself.
All right. Let me ask you this question.
I'm not comfortable with that.
Let me ask you this question then. There has to be a standard for something to be right or wrong. Wouldn't you agree?
I think there are many standards. I don't know if there's one individual standard. Like, I'm going to give you an example.
But you agree there would have to be a standard at least.
I think there are
standards. You can't just arbitrarily just say something is or not without applying it to some type of standard.
I think there are standards, sure. I agree with
Excellent. That. Other than preference, and feelings, what type of standard for good and evil is there?
Well, this is a deep question. We could go there. There's a lot of
Well,
philosophy.
yeah, I'm going to explain it to you, because there is only one standard for good and evil, and that is God. Any other standard could only be subjective. And the reason why is if you do not accept that a God exists, and this is my argument to most atheists, if you do not believe that a God exists, then you're just merely stardust. You believe that you're comprised of what is on the periodic table. That was comprised in the explosion of a star. So therefore, you are technically evolved stardust. So what is wrong with stardust bumping into stardust? Nothing at all. So there has to be some type of standard out of our realm that is able to judge what is underneath it. So for there to be an objective standard of good and evil, which could only be, because subjective is only by preference and by emotion and by feeling. The only objective standard could come from a God.
And I've heard that argument before, Chris. It's popularized. You know what I'm saying? I'm just so tired today. I have had a long day, but it was popularized by that professor out at Arizona State. I think it was Krauss, Richard Krauss, something like that.
Lawrence Krauss.
Lawrence Krauss. There you go. Lawrence Krauss. Yeah. And he was saying that, well, all of our, we should, thank our lucky stars that we're alive today, because we're made up of nothing but matter, particles, that come from an explosion of a supernova, because you have to have so much heat in order to get the higher elements on the periodic table. And, this is the same guy, oh, by the way, who got fired from his position just a couple months ago because he's having too many relationships with his students. I mean, I'm just trying to think of what standard do you have to? I mean, you have to be a scumbag, and that's what I got banned for, by the way. Is calling a guy a scumbag on Facebook this week. But I mean, do you actually have to be a scumbag in order to be popular in these circles? For crying out loud! It's ridiculous, because even if you can show that, okay, we're made up of you can demonstrate that we're made up of these elements that are in our body, but you cannot demonstrate that these elements came together in just a pure chance situation on some beach on some faraway planet or whatever, in a prebiotic scoop. You can't demonstrate that. There's no process available in which that can happen. And so when we start talking about, and the caboose is coming on this train, is you start talking about a moral standard, and you show the absolute goodness of God, and then you subject that to or compare that to a subjective standard. The old cliche or mantra goes, there are some societies out there that think it's polite to have your neighbors over for dinner, and there's some societies out there that think it's polite to have your neighbors for dinner. There's a difference there, because it's subjective. Whose point of view are you assuming here? Whereas with God, you have that absolute moral compass. I want to get to this video, guys. We're running out of time. We're down to less than a half hour left. Can we do that?
Yeah, we're gonna have to get back to. Yeah, we have to get back to Asana. We're gonna have to cut this talk short with these. So I don't have much time either.
I'll mute and I'll turn off my video, but that's fine. This is a good conversation. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Yeah, because and we can do this at some other time. And I enjoy this. I did this for 10, 15 years of evolution, atheist debate stuff. Okay, Asana. Now, what do you have to say? Let's hear what our friend Asana had to say to Chris.
Yeah, I do believe in the Exodus.
Okay, number one, I've told him about that stupid dog before. Is there a rule that you can't put the dog out on the porch during a debate or during a show? Because every time we turn around, that dog's yipping. And we're sitting here listening to this. I got my dog sitting right here. And every time this dog yips, he's looking up at me like, oh, is there somebody? Anyway, okay, I'm sorry, Chris. All right, here we go.
I do believe my wife came home at the wrong time to talk. It's going crazy. Honey, I'm doing a talk, so. Anyway, so, okay. So what we have is there's not a trace. I mean, when they go through that whole idea of, even in the Red Sea, there's no chariot wheels, there's no potteries, there's no anything on that route of that distance. Now we're talking about, this is so poignant. Now we're talking about probably 2 million people, according to the Bible, 2 million people, 600,000 military men and their families. So I would think, I mean, as far as historically speaking, the Egyptian has tons and tons of hieroglyphics and so forth and so forth. But if I ask someone, hey, what's the evidence of the Egyptians? You can say, hey, you could look at the pyramids, right? Or if I said, what's the evidence of the pyramids? You can just say, here's the pyramids. Okay, so we're not talking about the evidence of was there Israelites. We're not even talking about evidence of were people enslaved. We're not talking about evidence of did people live in certain places. What we're talking about is an evidence of 2 million people going from one place to the other. And I'm saying that with faith, we can believe that. We can certainly believe that because the faith of knowing with God things are possible, and perhaps it might not even be exactly how it's envisioned in the Bible. It could, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but we will believe that by faith. We can't just say, like he said, there was one town, someplace they had one body, or they found 2 bodies. Remember, when you're talking about the Exodus, you're also talking about the day of the Exodus. We're talking about not just Semitic children being buried. We're talking about who knows how many thousands or even millions, or definitely thousands of Egyptian firstborn that was.
Okay, I went a little too far with that. I want to pull something over here. Let me stop sharing the screen here. And then I'll let you go, Chris. Let me pull this over here. Do this, share here, ba bing, ba boom. Okay, I was talking about earlier when you look at this place that is the supposed location for the crossing. If you notice how deep the Gulf of Aqaba is right here, and then there's this like land bridge that extends across the thing, and then it drops off on the south side too. And you have this huge beach right up here, like that is on the side of the Sinai Peninsula. And then you would have them cross here. Well, there's pillars on each side of this commemorating. They don't know how old, I can't remember how old the pillars are, commemorating this crossing right here. So the idea of not being able to get across the Red Sea because they would have to go down too far and it's way too steep is solved right here on this. All right, Chris, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's the thing I was talking about earlier, Eric, is that myself, when I'm preparing myself for a debate, I want to look into the actual topic of the debate, and I want to study some of the scholarly sources on this. I want to see some evidence on what I'm talking about, or the lack thereof, depending on what I'm debating. And it seems to me like Asana has went to Sunday school, and it was like, haha, I'm ready to debate. Because as you've said, that, and again, the argument that I made about either the Red Sea or the Reed Sea, it's up for argument. I'm not on either side of the debate. It's just there is a debate out there of that type of scenario. So I don't throw weight to either side. To me, I could care less which one it is, only because that there is evidence that they were able to cross either way. So as you said, if it's Red Sea, they definitely had a way to cross by. They didn't have to go down 2,000 feet, back up 2,000 feet. There was almost like a little bridge there for them. And also for like the Reed Sea, it was almost the same type of thing. So there was evidence that the Israelites were able to get across. Now the problem with this is that you can show all of this, but without any evidence of any people and things to this nature, Asana's are going to just simply say that that's not evidence, that's just pure speculation. So again, I just want to reiterate what my plan was during this debate was to show that yes, there was Semitic people that came to Egypt. Yes, these Semitic people multiplied. Yes, these Semitic people had a great uprising, and that the Pharaoh put them into slavery. From then, there was calamities and things. Now, the biggest thing that the thing that I like when I was looking into this and reading and watching that documentary of Mahoney's, is that the admonitions of an Egyptian sage by Ipuwer actually describes what we see in the Bible. Now, the only reason that they don't accept it is because it, again, is 400 years before they believe that the Exodus took place. But just take a listen to this two parts, and these are quoted right from the admonition itself. And it says, "Behold, plagues sweeps the land. Blood is everywhere, with no shortage of the dead. He who buries his brother." Now remember this, it's saying he who buries his brother. It's not he who buries his father, he who buries his mother. Like it's specifically stating he who buries his brother in the ground is everywhere. Woe is the grief at this time, wailing throughout the land, mingled with lamentations. So when we go to the Bible, is that there was tremendous wailing in the land of Egypt on the morning of when the firstborns of in the land of Egypt were struck dead by the angel of death. So there was a bunch of wailing. So in this description, like Asana says, that I didn't provide any evidence, but this is just a description of brothers being buried into the ground and a great wailing in the land. So it's not like the land would have been wailing just for people normally dying. It seems to me that this is an exceptional type of death that is happening. And for that to make sense, we read the biblical language. And if we understand that it's younger ones that are dying, you can understand the wailing. I'm a father of 5. If any of my children die, I'm going to be wailing. But that's all I got to say.
Yeah, when we start talking about evidence, I mean, he begins that there's not one shred, not one shroud, not one iota of evidence for this. And I'm trying to think, well, I don't know what I'm trying to think here. I don't know what books he's read or where he's getting his information, but there's all kinds of evidence out there that supports this. Now, if you go down and you start looking, for it, you just might find it. Just like a thief is never going to find that cop that after he committed a crime. That's just not going to happen. But if you start looking for it, you can start putting these pieces. And this is why Mahoney calls it patterns of evidence, because you have patterns, you have these pieces of evidence, and they all point towards the Jews being in Egypt in 1400 BC, and that there was this mass exodus of it cites the 10 plagues. And then if you even get into where they cross, where I pointed to here, let me just show you where this is in the Gulf of Aqaba. Let's see here, put this map up here on the screen, where that location that I pointed out sits right here. Well, it talks about Moses going into the land of Midian I think it's the opening book of opening chapter. Whose mic is hot here? Who is this?
That's radical. I got him.
He's okay. He's probably in line at a.
Well, I want to say something, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Rad. What's up?
Well, I was just thinking about that because I came back in, and you guys are back to the debate talking about the evidence and stuff. I don't know, Chris, did you bring this up about the pigs, about the archaeological evidence of the pigs in the land of Canaan?
No, sir, I did not. I didn't get a chance.
Okay. How's it going, brother? So here's the interesting thing about the pigs in the land of Canaan after the Exodus. Before the Exodus, they had archaeological evidence of pig bones, okay, of pig farming and so on and so forth. But as you get through the biblical area of the Exodus, okay, of where they're taking over the land of Canaan, guess what happens? Okay, you have less and less pig farming. In other words, you have less and less pig bones, okay, in pig farming, okay, in the cities, okay, around the time that that the biblical and archaeological evidence agree. In other words, all of a sudden, for some reason, okay, for no other reason, no other explanation, a viable food source disappears in these cities and towns and areas in the land of Canaan. So this is definite evidence, I would say, of all of a sudden the Semitic people who were opposed to eating pork, okay, taking over and conquering these lands. I just found that interesting. Just wanted to point that out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you know, when you start, and this is exactly the type of thing that Asana would be denying, is that, well, that's just anecdotal evidence that doesn't demonstrate anything. Well, the fact of the matter is, it lines up perfectly with what the Bible teaches. And when we look at this map here of where you think that the Exodus could have taken place, it begins up here in the land of Goshen. And then they come down through the Sinai, they cross here, and this is the land of Midian. And out here they have, what did I do with it? They have pictures, I mean, they have hieroglyphs there of that explain these things. They have this rock. It looks like it's been eroded with water. You have the Mountain of Laws, Jabal Laws, I think is the name of it, where it has a blackened top where God descended on there and burned the rock around. They have all these things, but they don't let anybody in there to investigate them today. That's the big problem, is trying to deny the biblical timeline and the biblical history. And this is what Saudi Arabia does, oh, by the way, is they repress all kinds of information. If you want to have any type of proof of that, go ahead and take a look at Mecca today. You cannot do any archaeology in Mecca today, and the reason why is they cemented it all over to build all those high rises around the Kaaba. So
yeah, and to speak on that too, Eric, Manfred Bitek, the dig site in Avaris, he actually has to cover his up at the end of the year. He has to put dirt and everything back in it, and they resoil it. So like where he dug that archaeological stuff up is now under a field of wheat and everything else. And if there was anything, and the Egyptian government, Mahoney actually, I watched the three talks that he did after, well, and it took him a month and a half to debate with the Egyptian government to allow him to go to Avaris to film it, because just in case something actually affirmed the biblical Exodus. So that was the whole reason why they didn't want anybody in there. And he actually states that in his lectures. I think there's a 4-part lecture that him and David do afterwards.
yeah.
Well, yeah. So I just want to chime in on Saudi Arabia. You mentioned Mecca and Medina. Now, if you do any kind of construction work, okay, in Jerusalem, it's like kind of a big deal, okay? And they actually have archaeologists side by side with the excavators and the construction workers, okay, to make sure they don't find anything. And when they do find anything, okay, the building is halted, okay, which is a pain in the butt if you're a builder. Don't get me wrong, that's a pain in the butt. But the building is halted, okay, and the archaeologists go in there and they extract what they can in a certain amount of time. I mean, they don't give them free reign, you know what I'm saying? In most cases, unless you're around the Temple Mount. But they give them, 6 weeks or whatever to go in and document and extract everything that they can get before they can continue building. In Medina and Mecca, archaeologists the world over, okay, were complaining about this massively because they were giving absolutely no time, okay, because there was nothing there. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, there was absolutely nothing there that predated Muhammad or predated the Islamic narrative. Okay, because let's face it, as we pretty much all know now, that town, that little village, did not exist until well after Muhammad. You know what I mean? So that's definitely a definite tell, as they say, of something shady, something fishy going on there. They're trying to cover it up. They're trying to hide it. Whereas the Jews in Israel, they're like, no, we want this. You know what I'm saying? Because everything they find proves the biblical narrative. And Christians the same way. Everything that they find proves the Christian narrative. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When I remember I went to Greece, I think it was 2000 or 2001, and they were building for the Greek Olympics that were coming up. And they were doing a lot of excavating, a lot of construction. And every time they take a shovel to the soil, they're digging something up. And they started cataloging, they catalog everything that they dig up. But eventually they just started running out of room where to put all this stuff, because there is a history there. There's a known history there. There's a confirmed history there, not only archaeologically, but also we have manuscript evidence for it. We have tradition for this. And when you would go to the subway, they would have all kinds of display cases all around, filled to the brink, full of all of these ancient artifacts that they were digging up every single time that spade hit the soil. So if Mecca was supposed to be this city that existed at the time of Abraham 3,000 years ago, then anybody that would build anything within that city of Mecca, every time that they would dig into the soil, they would be digging up something that is ancient there in just about every square inch of it. So,
have you guys seen?
Say that again.
Have you guys seen the pictures of Mecca from the late 1800s when photography was just being invented? Late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a guy that actually made the Hajj. Okay, he was a non-Muslim, and he actually dressed as a woman in a lot of cases, if I'm not mistaken. In other words, he wore the burqa to get in there. And you got to see these pictures. Go look them up. Okay, it's a complete crap hole. You know what I mean? This is supposed to be the center of the Islamic Empire for 1,400 years, and nobody really pays any attention to it. Well, yeah, you're bringing it up. I mean, you're bringing up some of these images. I mean, it honestly is just a little village.
Yeah, this is okay.
Pretty much. I mean, you're looking like something out of the Old West. You know what I mean? An old coal mining town. There were no serious structures. There was no building. There was no money. In other words, nobody put any money into this. None of the Islamic caliphs, none of the Islamic empires put any money into Mecca at all. They left it as, well, I don't know what they left it as, but it's pretty much crap.
Right.
You know what I mean? Up until the 70s, and all that Saudi Arabian oil money poured into it, that's when you now have it as, well, minus booze and minus beaches and minus everything else and minus, it's a touristy kind of spot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, here's what we have now. I don't know if you can see this on the screen, how well you can see it anyway. You probably can't see it, right? Because you're probably on your phone. But I mean, this is what it looks like now, and all of that archaeology that was supposed to be around the Kaaba here, it's all cemented over. So how are you going to? I mean, this is where we start looking at, okay, how do you know that Mecca existed at that time? And the fact of the matter is that you just can't demonstrate it in any way, shape, or form. All right, we're gonna go ahead and cut the show, guys. We're at an hour and a half right now, and I got a couple things I got to get done tonight, schoolwork wise.
Debate night, man. Debate night. Just let you know, the debate.
Right.
Watch it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's one of the things that I got to do, because I assigned. Yeah. I assigned extra credit tonight for the kids if they would watch the debate and they fill out a worksheet about what was said about certain topics. And so I got to watch it to make sure that they're not lying to me when they turn this. Okay, everybody that came, thank you so much for coming. Issa, thank you for coming up on mic tonight and having a great discussion. Rad and Chris, thank you again. Adam's here, John's here, Bailey's here, and Assam, you just showed up, dude. Oh, Mamma Mia. And Darcy, thank you for hanging out with us tonight. We appreciate you spending your time with us and listening in. We'll be back here next Tuesday night on Radio Free Kafiristan. God bless you. We'll talk to you all then. Bye now.